Maria stepped out of her car and looked up at the gray sky, the air heavy, with the kind of silence that felt almost like warning, but she ignored the weight in her chest and walked toward the shelter, a place she had passed by many times, but never entered until today, her heart still raw from the loss of her husband 2 winters ago. The house they once filled with laughter now echoed with silence and shadows she could not chase away, no matter how many lights she left on at night. She had tried everything from painting to gardening to late-night baking, but nothing worked, and the emptiness grew louder. So when her friend suggested she consider adopting a dog, she laughed at first, then found herself thinking about it in the quiet hours just before dawn. She told herself she would just look. She told herself she might not find a connection. She told herself she was not ready, but the moment she stepped through the doors of the shelter, her eyes scanned the cages until they landed on him, a large German shepherd alone in a corner, his back to the room, his ears flicking slightly as if he heard her before she even spoke. His fur was thick and unkempt, and his body coiled like a spring wound too tightly. His nameplate read Rex, and below it a yellow tag that said caution, do not touch. Maria walked slowly to his kennel, ignoring the whispers from staff at the front desk, who watched her with a mix of curiosity and concern. She knelt down a few feet from the bars and waited, not saying a word, just letting the moment stretch between them. Rex turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto hers with such intensity that she felt it deep in her spine. Not fear exactly, but something sharper and more aware. His gaze was not wild but focused, like he was studying her, like he was waiting for her to be like the others who flinched or looked away. But Maria did not look away. She stayed still, letting the seconds pass like an invitation. She knew pain when she saw it. She knew what it meant to hide in plain sight, to push people away before they could leave you first, and something in the way Rex held his ground reminded her of her own grief masked by strength and silence. A staff member approached cautiously, her tone gentle as she explained Rex's history: returned 3 times for aggression, had bitten a trainer once. No one could get close to him, no one except for one volunteer who left a month ago. Even she had said Rex needed more than a shelter could offer, more than structure or discipline. He needed something else, something we can't give him, and it broke her heart. Maria nodded, taking in every word, but her eyes never left Rex, who now stood up fully, his body tense yet unmoving. He took one step forward, then another, his eyes searching hers for something she could not name, and when he reached the bars of the kennel and pressed his nose against them, Maria reached out slowly, resting her hand just a few inches away from his muzzle, not touching, just waiting. He did not growl, he did not bark, he only stared, and Maria whispered so softly the words almost disappeared, I know how it feels to be left behind. The staff called her brave, some called her foolish, but Maria simply stood and said, I want to adopt him today. The room fell quiet, as if no one expected her to say that, as if the very air had paused in disbelief, and Rex, still watching her, did not move away. The shelter manager stood frozen for a moment, papers in hand, lips parted as if trying to find the right words to stop her, to delay her, to gently steer her toward a dog with a gentler past. But Maria's voice was steady, her expression calm, the kind of calm that does not come from ignorance, but from pain lived and lessons learned. The manager finally spoke, her tone cautious. He is not like the others, she said. He has been through things we cannot explain. He was found chained in a backyard so tight his fur was rubbed raw. Animal control said he had no water, no food for days. When he came here, he would not let anyone near him. He attacked a kennel tech who tried to clean his cage. He destroyed a metal crate on his first night, and when someone tried to pet him, he lunged. They say he is broken and cannot be fixed. Maria listened without interruption, every sentence painting a darker picture of the dog who still stood at the bars silently watching her, not barking, not snarling, not retreating. The manager went on, we have had 3 adopters try to take him, and all experienced, all confident. One returned him within 24 hours after he snapped over a food bowl. Another lasted a week until he cornered their teenage son. The last came back crying with a shredded couch and bite marks on her arm. She still defends him, says he was scared, but we cannot afford to make the same mistake again. She paused, hoping the weight of her words would land, but Maria's eyes were locked with Rex's, and she said calmly, he does not look angry to me, he looks afraid, and I know fear. I have lived in it, I have woken up to it, I have built walls with it, and learned to sleep behind them, and so has he. The staff exchanged glances, murmurs passed between them, and a few shook their heads, gently warning her again, this dog is dangerous, this dog is not safe for adoption. But Maria signed the paperwork with steady hands, filling in each blank as though it were a contract written between 2 survivors, not just woman and dog, but something deeper, something unspoken. They brought Rex out with double leashes, a muzzle in place, 3 handlers moving in sync like dancers in a well-rehearsed routine, and even then he resisted, pulling back, trembling, his body stiff and uncertain. But when he saw Maria standing by the door, calm and waiting without fear, something shifted slightly. His ears twitched, his tail lifted just an inch, and he stepped forward slowly, unsure but willing. They warned her again before she left. Do not let him off leash, keep your distance, do not try to cuddle or corner him, and please be careful. And Maria nodded each time, but her mind was already somewhere else, already imagining him in the passenger seat. Already picturing his food bowl in her kitchen and his bed beside her own. Rex climbed into her car without much resistance, but refused to sit, pacing the back seat, his breath heavy, his eyes wide. She kept the radio off and her voice soft, talking to him not like an animal, but like an old friend who needed time and space and grace. By the time they reached home, the sky had darkened and the first drops of rain tapped against the windshield, and when she opened the door, Rex did not run. He stepped out slowly and looked at the house, the porch light glowing and the scent of warmth and something he had never had waiting just inside. He hesitated only once before following her in. The first night was not quiet and it was not peaceful. The moment they stepped into the house, Rex circled every room with low growls, checking corners, sniffing the air, his nails clicking on the hardwood like nervous drumbeats. Maria gave him space. She left the front door open for a while just in case he changed his mind and wanted to run, but he stayed, eyes wide, body tense, as he investigated each unfamiliar sound, each shadow that flickered on the wall. She placed a bowl of food in the kitchen and walked away, not watching, not forcing him to eat, just letting the moment be what it was, uncertain, raw, and unfamiliar. He did not touch the food, not even after an hour had passed. Instead, he lay down in the hallway, his back to the wall, his head up, his ears alert, and his eyes never once closing completely. Maria spent the evening reading on the couch, her voice drifting through the house softly, the words of a novel not chosen for any reason except it was the one she had started last winter and never finished because grief had made the words lose their meaning. But tonight she read aloud to fill the silence, and after a while Rex stopped pacing and simply listened. When the clock struck midnight, she turned off the light and went to bed, leaving the door open behind her, not expecting him to follow, but hoping he would understand that he was not locked away, not confined, not trapped. And sometime around 2 in the morning she heard the softest sound, his nails against the floor. Then the quiet thump as he lay down just outside her door. The days that followed were not easy. He barked at the sound of the washing machine, growled when the mail was delivered, and refused to go near the backyard no matter how gently she encouraged him. He destroyed a pillow, shredded a rug, and on the third morning lunged at the window when a jogger passed by, teeth bared, breath wild. Maria did not flinch, she did not yell, she waited until he calmed, then spoke softly again, telling him it was okay, that he was safe, and that she was not going anywhere. By the end of the first week a few changes began to appear, small things like the way his body relaxed when she entered the room, or how he would watch her cook from the doorway, his eyes no longer hard but curious. She started leaving the back door open during the day, and one afternoon as she watered the plants, Rex stepped outside slowly, one paw at a time, as if the grass might bite back, and then stood still in the sun, eyes closed for a full minute before returning inside. Neighbors had begun to notice the dog with the dark coat and deep bark, who now lived in the quiet house on the corner. Some whispered warnings, others crossed the street when they saw him, but Maria said nothing. She just kept walking him every morning, the leash loose, the pace slow, and if anyone asked she only smiled and said, "We are learning each other." On the 10th night something remarkable happened. She was sitting in her chair with her book open, not reading, just thinking, when Rex approached slowly, his eyes soft and his steps quiet. He rested his head on her knee just for a second, then walked away without looking back, and Maria felt something in her chest shift, something that had not moved in years. The sun had barely risen on the 11th morning when Maria opened her eyes to find Rex lying just outside her bedroom, his body stretched, his ears relaxed, and for the first time his eyes were closed, not in sleep filled with fear, but in a kind of peace that hinted at trust. She stayed quiet, not wanting to break the fragile stillness that had settled over them like fresh snow, untouched and quiet and rare. She made coffee, slowly letting the warmth of it fill the kitchen, and as she turned to grab her mug, she found Rex standing in the doorway, watching her with eyes that no longer darted to every sound, but instead lingered on her as if waiting to be invited. She smiled and stepped back, giving him space, and he stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, just ready. That morning their walk was different. The street was the same, the sky was the same, but something between them had shifted. There was no pulling, no growling at passing cars, no sudden lunges, just a steady rhythm of steps and breath side by side. And when a neighbor approached, cautiously holding the leash of a small white terrier, Rex stiffened at first, but with one quiet word from Maria he looked away and kept walking, and the neighbor stared, stunned by the sight of the dog they had once called dangerous, now walking like he belonged. The days that followed became a kind of dance, each one bringing small signs of change, the sound of Rex's tail thumping lightly against the floor when Maria came home, the way he sat near her when she gardened, his head tilted as if trying to understand the language of flowers and soil, the way he no longer growled at the vacuum but instead followed it around, curious and unafraid. But it was not all easy, not all Soft edges and silent victories. There were moments when the fear returned, when shadows in the hallway made him bark, when loud noises made him run to the corner shaking eyes wide and haunted, and Maria never scolded, never pushed, she sat with him. During every storm, every spiral, every setback, her hand resting lightly nearby, never forced, just there waiting. She began keeping a journal, not of what Rex did, but of what he taught her, about patience, about how healing does not come with a calendar. About how love is not a rescue mission, but a decision made over and over, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. One night, as she cooked dinner, the smell of rosemary chicken filling the house, she heard a noise outside and looked up to see Rex standing at the front window, his ears forward, his tail calm, and then she saw what he saw, a teenager walking down the street, head low, shoulders tense. Rex gave a low bark, then sat down watching quietly, and Maria felt the oddest sense of recognition, because she had once looked like that too, lost and alone and hoping someone might notice. Later that evening, as Rex lay at her feet and she wrote in her journal, Maria realized something. She had come to the shelter looking for a companion, for a dog who needed saving, but what she found instead was a creature who mirrored her grief, who held space for her silence, who stood guard not just at the door, but at the edge of every lonely moment that had once consumed her. And slowly the house no longer felt haunted, it felt like home. It was early spring when the neighborhood started to change around them. Flowers began pushing through the soil in small defiant bursts of color. The air held a warmth that made the trees sway softer, and Maria noticed that Rex began to wake before her each morning, not to bark or pace, but to sit quietly by the window watching the sunrise, like it meant something to him, something sacred and quiet, and his eyes would follow the birds as they moved through the sky, like he remembered what it meant to hope. She started walking him farther now, down to the park, past the pond where children threw breadcrumbs, to ducks and old men sat on benches feeding memories, to squirrels. People noticed him, of course, they always noticed a dog like Rex. Big, powerful, sharp-eyed, but now they also noticed how close he stayed to Maria, how he never pulled or barked or lunged, how his eyes softened when she spoke to him, and how he looked at her not like an owner, but like someone who had earned his belief. It was during one of these walks that the scream came, sharp, sudden, and unmistakable. It echoed from across the street, where a child no older than 7 had chased a runaway ball into the road, and in the same moment a car came speeding around the corner, tires screeching, metal flashing, sunlight off its windshield, and Maria froze, heart clenched, body rooted. But Rex moved like lightning, unleashed, his leash snapped from her hand, and he shot forward, not with rage, but with purpose, of force, of instinct and memory, and something deeper that even he did not understand. The driver slammed the brakes, the car skidded and veered just in time. The child stumbled and fell, and Rex stood over him, head low, body tense, eyes locked on the approaching danger, as if he would take the impact himself if it meant keeping that small heartbeat safe. And when the car finally stopped a few feet away, the silence that followed felt louder than the scream itself. People ran out of houses, neighbors called his name, not Maria's, but Rex's, and he stood unmoving until the boy was scooped up by his mother, sobbing thank you over and over through shaking breaths, and Rex turned slowly and walked back to Maria as if nothing had happened, his ears back, his tail still. Maria knelt down, arms wide, and he stepped into them gently, like he knew this moment was not his alone, and the crowd that gathered did not see a dangerous dog or a warning label or a cage. They saw a protector, a soul that had once been shattered and had chosen to stand up anyway. And in that moment Maria felt the weight of every no, every warning, every look of disbelief melt into the sidewalk around her. The boy's mother hugged her, said she had seen him before, had crossed the street, had pulled her son away from him more than once, and now she could not stop crying because the dog she had feared had just saved her world. Later that day the local news called, a neighbor had shared the story online, and it spread faster then Maria could process. The shelter called, too shocked and breathless, asking if it was true and if they could visit and see Rex for themselves, not the Rex they remembered, but the one who stood now beside Maria, ears relaxed, tail flicking, eyes alert and full of something no one had ever seen in him before, peace. By the time the shelter staff arrived 2 days later, word of what Rex had done had already traveled beyond the neighborhood. The local paper ran a short story with a headline that read, former shelter dog saves child from oncoming car, and people started sending letters to the shelter asking if the story was real, asking if a dog once labeled unfixable could truly become a hero. And Maria stood at the door that morning as the shelter van pulled up, and Rex sat beside her, calm, alert, his head tilted slightly as if he recognized the sound of that engine from another life. 3 staff members stepped out. One of them was the same manager who had tried so hard to talk Maria out of adopting him, and she looked at Rex like she had just seen a ghost, not a dangerous one, but a kind she never believed in before, the kind that returns to show you how wrong you were and how right someone else had been. The woman knelt slowly, her hands open, her eyes wide, and she whispered his name, not with command, but with wonder, and Rex stepped forward slowly, his ears back, not in fear, but in thought, as if remembering her voice from behind the cage bars. He stood close enough for her to rest her hand gently on his head, and for a long moment no one spoke and no one moved, because something had cracked open in the air between them, something bigger than regret, something more powerful than apology. And Maria said softly, "He is not broken, he never was, he just needed someone to stop running from the noise long enough to hear what was underneath it." They sat together in the living room while Rex lay on the rug, his head resting on one paw, eyes watching quietly as the staff asked questions and took notes, not for a report, but for themselves. To understand what they had missed, how they had failed him, and how Maria had seen what they could not. One of them asked if she had training experience or a background in behavioral rescue, and Maria smiled and said no, just grief and time and enough silence to hear him speak without words. The shelter manager nodded slowly, her eyes damp, and she said, "Sometimes we forget that saving animals is not just about rules and charts and caution signs. Sometimes it is about seeing through the storm too." What is hiding in the quiet? That night, after the visitors left, Maria found Rex outside, lying in the grass, his eyes on the sky, his body still and open to the breeze. She sat beside him cross-legged, her hands in her lap, and said thank you, not for what he did for the boy, but for reminding her that healing is not a straight path, and that sometimes it is the ones no one believes in who carry the strength to stand between danger and innocence. She thought about her late husband and the long, silent days that followed his passing, and how she had stopped believing that anyone or anything could bring the light back into the rooms of her home. But here she was beside a dog who once trembled at the sound of footsteps, who now chased off shadows by simply being present. Rex turned his head slightly and placed it in her lap for the first time, not out of fear, not out of submission, but out of trust. And Maria placed her hand on his head gently and let her tears fall, not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude for second chances, for quiet victories, and for the broken things that choose to stay. The days after the visit from the shelter seemed to move differently, as if time had slowed down to honor the quiet miracle that had taken place in Maria's home. Strangers began stopping her on her walks, not to warn her or cross the street, but to ask if this was the dog from the news, the one who saved the little boy, the one who used to be called aggressive and dangerous. And Maria would nod and smile and say, "This is Rex, and yes, he is the same, but also not the same at all." Children who once hid behind their parents now waved at him from porches. Some even ran up to offer him treats, their little hands shaking just a bit before resting on his head. And every time Rex stood still, calm, patient, as if he knew this was part of something bigger than himself, as if he understood that trust once lost had to be earned piece by piece, and he was willing to wait for every single one. Maria began receiving letters from people she had never met, one from a retired soldier who said he had been labeled broken too, and another from a mother whose child refused to speak until they got a rescue dog, just like Rex, who sat beside her for hours while she cried into his fur. And Maria read each letter aloud to Rex on the porch during the late afternoon sun, his ears flicking gently, his eyes blinking slowly, as if absorbing every word. One evening, while the sky turned gold and the world held its breath between day and night, Maria sat with her journal open and looked at Rex, who now spent most of his time near her without needing an invitation. He had become a constant, not a shadow, not a threat, but a presence, strong and steady and warm. She thought about all the words that had once been used to define him: dangerous, unadoptable, unpredictable, and how none of them had told the truth. The truth was that Rex had never been a monster, he had simply been alone, misunderstood, left to defend himself in a world that only saw his teeth and not his pain. And when Maria reached for him that first day at the shelter, it had not been bravery or foolishness, it had been recognition, the way one wounded soul sees another and understands without speaking, that survival sometimes looks like fear and healing sometimes sounds like silence. It was late when the knock came, soft and unexpected, and when Maria opened the door she saw the boy's mother standing there holding her son's hand, his eyes wide and curious, his other hand clutching a small envelope. She smiled and asked if they could say thank you again, not just for what Rex had done, but for what it meant to know that second chances were real. The boy stepped forward slowly and knelt down in front of Rex, his hands shaking just slightly as he held out the envelope. And Rex looked at him, then at Maria, then gently touched the envelope with his nose. Inside was a drawing, a crayon picture of Rex standing like a guardian in front of the boy, arms outstretched, eyes bright with courage, the word hero written in bold letters across the top. And Maria felt her breath catch, because this was the image the world had now of the dog who once cowered in silence and steel and fear. And she knew then without doubt that he had not just saved a child, he had rewritten his own story. Months passed and the seasons changed as they always do. The harsh winter thawed into spring, and then the world bloomed again with color and sound. But Maria and Rex had changed in ways deeper than the turning of the calendar. Now they moved through Their days not as two broken pieces, but as a whole, something strong and quiet and steady that carried the scars of the past, like badges of survival, not shame or weakness. Rex, who once trembled at footsteps, now greeted visitors at the door, tail wagging, eyes bright and curious, and Maria watched him with a mixture of awe and gratitude because she knew every moment had been earned, every step forward had been hard fought, and every quiet victory had built a bridge between two souls who refused to give up. They began volunteering at the shelter together, Maria sharing their story to others who doubted or feared or wondered if second chances were truly possible, and Rex sitting calmly by her side, a living testament to the power of patience and love and understanding. And sometimes when new dogs arrived with eyes like Rex's used to be, she saw in them the same fear, the same hope, the same need to be seen not as monsters, but as beings worthy of kindness. Their bond became something more than owner and pet. It was a connection woven from threads of healing and trust, a reminder that sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to the most unexpected friendships, and that even when the world warns you to turn away, it is the ones who dare to stay who change everything. On quiet evenings, Maria would sit on the porch with Rex at her feet, watching the stars appear one by one, and she would think about the day she first met him in that small shelter, how fear and love had collided, and how a warning had turned into a promise, how a dog once labeled aggressive had become a guardian and a friend. And she whispered, "Thank you, not just for saving a child, but for saving her too." And Rex would lift his head gently, resting it on her knee as if to say, "You saved me too." And in the stillness of that moment, Maria knew without doubt that sometimes the greatest miracles come not in grand gestures or loud announcements, but in the quiet courage to open your heart to someone who others have given up on.